Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 16th of February 2020. I sometimes get these reality checks. They just hit me like a slap on the face sometimes because I don't live within the general society as such. I live in the country, not an expensive palace, believe you me. Most folk might say it's a dump even, but the fact is I'm pretty quiet and I don't have television, I don't watch TV, I have the internet. But because I don't have TV, I don't get and folk don't realise this because most folk do watch television. Most of your programming, almost 100% of your programming and your updates on what you think, what you believe, how we treat people and so on, and even how to dress, how to behave, and what to say, and the terminology you use now, because they're constantly changing it, all comes from television, both in fiction and non-fiction. Most of it comes through fiction, actually. And most TV is fiction, even all your reality shows. They're not real. People don't behave normally in real life as they do in the reality. Or you'd run away from them if they did. But I can remember back in the 90s, I think, when they started doing the first kind of reality shows, which were like contests. And back in the 90s, for a little while, I did have TV, and rabbit ears, of course. And I saw these shows where they'd get people in to do all crazy kind of things and make spectacles of themselves. They'd eat worms and all that nonsense, or lie in coffins of worms, all that ridiculous stuff. And I knew that it was really a program designed to take off and to expand into a preordained direction, basically. That's how everything's done, you see. It's step by step and incremental, but big plans are laid down long in advance, years in advance of where they take you. And I had no idea just how far the present day reality shows have gone. And so in this surrealistic world, and it really is a surrealistic world if you're living in electronic reality, if you think you're in reality, because most folk are. They've either got the phones to their skull all the time, or they're watching something from television or so on. But all this stuff, and they can chat with each other about all the things that they're watching on television, because these things are designed to get as many viewers as possible by using psychologists and behaviorists to get the people to watch and get addicted to it. And of course, sex is the big pool, naturally. And they have these. So in the middle of all this happening and the crisis across the world, as folk get this coronavirus and how it's played up to the hilt. Initially, it was played down unless you were one of the general newspapers that are part of the big club. And of course, anyone who wasn't part of the big club was getting hammered for just mentioning facts and even their observations, in fact. But now the big papers, of course, themselves are saying all the scary stuff, and it's okay for them to say it. I noticed, too, they even had little okays for different sites and so on, or articles, or even YouTube things like okayed by the WHO, or a line through it, meaning it's taboo. This is how far things have gone. You see, with general terrorism in Britain, and all countries are part of this big system of terrorist control. And terrorism control also comes into crisis control, for those who don't get it, like the COBRA system in Britain, for instance. And they have a whole panel of so-called experts to decide what the public will be told or won't be told, and because they want you to behave in a certain way. Well, it's the same thing when it comes to pandemics, etc. Just like the movies, of course, they've given you so many pandemic-type movies, getting you used to this idea for the last 25, 30 years. And a whole stack in the last 10 years, in fact. Right down to the welding of the doors and high-rises at the bottoms of the big main doors so that they can't get out, which they're actually doing in China now, apparently. So you're living in this amazing, again, electronic reality, as I say, most folk are into. And so I looked up the newspapers today just to get an update on the coronavirus and see what's happening. And some of the papers had nothing at all. Other ones had little one-liners that were old, a few days old. And I looked at the Daily Mail, and as I say, I'm so far out of it. I'm like a person looking from the outside to the in. I'm looking into this goldfish bowl of the world. The first, at the very top of the Daily Mail, and a lot of other papers too, I found out, was the death of a woman who hosted a TV show, a reality TV show, and how she'd apparently been charged, or was going to be charged, or was got the charge. Who cares about the gossip? The fact is, she'd hit her boyfriend with a lamp, supposedly, and she lost her job or something, or was laid off temporarily. But anyway, I guess the inference was that maybe she died anyway. For some reason or another, she died. But this is someone on TV, a TV show that's a kind of dating thing, which is all about sex, naturally. And they had the pictures there of her and the different, even contestants and so on, who all look like, to me, who doesn't watch TV, like cartoon characters. Really. Even the guys, they look like they had their faces. I don't know, can you manicure faces? I wonder, I just don't know anymore. But the hair was up, and these big tufts on the top, just like they used to see in the cartoons from the 1950s and 60s. I'm not kidding, that's how they used to look. And that's how the people look today. Who's designing all this stuff for them to copy? Because it's copied. Nothing comes from the grassroots in style and fashion or anything, you know. Anyway, that was the top story, and I thought, wait a minute here, there's folk on cruise ships where folk are dying and they can't get on, all that kind of stuff going on. There's this massive crisis in China going on. There's so many amazing things to talk, but the main story is this woman, the host, who died on a reality TV show. This is the reality, and it said that millions of folk tuned in every time the show was on. Now, I'm sure most folk out there maybe I probably know what I'm talking about because they have TV and so on. But do you realize how fake a reality is? If you believe in all that stuff, how fake it is. It's incredibly fake as opposed to our everyday lives. Reality today is made up of fiction for most people, more so than any time in history. And not just fiction, but programmable. It's a programmable fiction that you're given, predictive programming, as I've said so many times, where you're getting readied for the next stage of whatever it happens to be, right down to even the pandemics to come and how you'll behave, etc. But the COBRA system that deals supposedly with terrorism and what you'll be told and how to manage society, including panic in society, you know, or how to prevent panic. The idea is the same with pandemics. The big teams that manage pandemics keep the public ignorant, just like the movies, by the way, and tell them as little as possible. They say they're there to treat them like children and don't even tell them any hard, truthful facts. That's really how it's government. They see themselves as being the kind of placebo, or the tranquilizer, you might even say, for the general public. That's what they're in this kind of situation. And folk don't realize that how really thin this veneer of civilization is. And it does take a form of coordination of different segments of society and different aspects of society and emotions and so on, and the various dynamics and psychodynamics too, are all going on within societies to keep it kind of functioning without it breaking down or folk going crazy and destroying each other, you know. And it's fine, you can get along. I said this years and years ago. Everyone can get along, including all the different massive segments of societies within cities. They're all broken up. I don't care what anybody says. I've been through cities. I know there's different quadrants and so on. Everyone can get along as long as money's flowing. And then you get basic foodstuffs and money left over to spend for entertainment and so on. Everyone can get along in society as long as that exists. But when it starts to break down, which eventually it might, I'm not saying it will, we don't know how bad this whole pandemic is going to be. We hear all the scary stories from the top now, as I say, from the top. And from all the supposed country or national experts now in Britain and elsewhere. But you'll see society changing if what they say comes to pass. We don't know yet. There's still this almost deniability amongst the public, mainly those who are still in the know, who watch this kind of stuff going on. They've heard them cry wolf so many times from the WHO. And we know they want big world exercises, and this is also an exercise in so many departments of governance, as they call it, to take care of everything and try to keep it all together as we go through it. So time will tell what's true and what's fictional and so on, and how bad things really are going to be. But as I say, supposedly the top specialist in Britain, or one of them, has come out and said that this could really, they're not going to stop it. In fact, what I've seen, even in the last couple of days, is all the signs that they're going to try to stop it. They've made decisions at the top, obviously, where they're even letting a lot of planes come back in from not so much China, perhaps, or parts of China, yeah, but also countries around China where many Chinese live, and they go back and forth to China all the time. I mean, by the week. So it looks to me as though they've come to the conclusion at the top that they can't really even slow it down much, or they're not going to slow it down much. It's too big for them. We'll have to wait and see. There's a whole bunch of planes grounded at Heathrow Airport, supposedly, because some people got sick. We've had all this amazing confusing disclosures to the public, all conflicting stories about even the type of disease it is, this coronavirus. In other words, what's it really like? And initially, of course, you were being told to be calm and don't worry and all that. It's just like a cold or a flu, and you get over it. Some people only get a runny nose, they said. I mean, when we look into China, what they're doing there, and they go up and down the streets with these massive trucks, spraying this goodness knows what into the air at a good height too, and through offices and all the rest of it. This isn't just a little runny nose thing. So don't you get fed up getting treated like a child? And you're told just to wash your hands. Well, if you go out in public to do whatever you have to do, even to get food or whatever, where do you see places to wash your hands? Look, everything you do, you have to open doors and all the rest of it and close. Everybody else does the same stuff. Shopping cart, same thing. Eh? Do you see any bowls of water out there, disinfectant? No. And if you cough, just cough up your sleeve to say, this is the best to tell us to do in the 21st century. Think about it. We're being treated like children, and not very bright children either. So it's not a good scenario. What makes it more scary, I think, for most people who have seen all these movies, they've been churning all these movies out about pandemics and virus and plagues and so on for years, showing you what they do, including the quarantine methods, including the welding of the doors in the high-rises, which they're now doing in China. You've all been trained what to expect, in a sense, you see. And of course, what you've been told and trained to do is to obey authorities in such situations. Because in the movies, it's not good for those who disobey the authorities in such situations. So government really, and plus too, I think on top of all of this, you've had so many people over the years from big institutions, even having in real open dialogues on television and so on with the so-called experts. It's too many people on the planet. There's just too many people. I remember the one from Australia a few years ago. And again, they make them stars, these professors. The star-making machinery tells you this is a special professor. He's more important than other professors. And they're going to be the voice box, basically, for pushing the agenda for depopulation. And he even said, it'd really be a decent thing if the people around retirement age would just, die and leave the jobs for younger people. You see? And we hear this stuff and we say, what on earth is this? But these are the people who belong to big think tanks and institutions that have world meetings on. These are the characters too who end up going to different dialoguing conferences within the World Economic Forum, this big, again, massive institution that you don't vote for, where all the richest folk go to decide how you're going to live in the future, according to the way they want you to live or exist. So that doesn't help it either, does it? When so many have been chomping at the bit for a long time, or the Georgia Guidestones, and if the world was just reduced to so many million people, from the billions to the millions, then it'd be a better place, they say. Doesn't help, does it? It really doesn't help. And I'm sure many folk are so puzzled. Many are puzzled, especially professionals who are not in the higher echelon of understanding what's going on, because you're not allowed into it. There's different tiers of knowledge and tiers of confidence, you might say. But there's many professionals, as I say, who just can't fathom if something so awful has been unleashed upon the public, inadvertently or whatever. It doesn't make any difference how it got there, they say. At this time, concentrate on the problem, not the cause or who's to blame. But the fact is, even the basic national quarantine laws are being tossed out the window. If you want to save the nation, you don't bring people who are possibly infected, and you don't know yet, see? You don't know yet, into countries straight from the most infected area, and give them little notes to sign. You promise to go home and quarantine yourself. Oh, sure, yeah, and away they go. Or not even being quarantined into a population that is completely clean from it or free from it. You don't let them in. You don't do that kind of thing. That's not quarantine. That's not even common sense. Especially when they keep telling you, and they kept telling you at the time, we don't understand this virus. It's new. A new type. They didn't even know what the period inside you, the prodromal period, would be from getting infected to showing the symptoms. Because you understand, it's not mathematics here. There's so many different human variations within the human type. That some folk might show symptoms in a few days, other folk might take weeks. That's standard, you see. So try to put it down to mathematical, like you're all robots exactly the same, cloned. It doesn't work. So they came out with statements initially, as you all know. It could take up to 2 weeks, you see. And they even had, I think, quarantine initially for 8 days or something like that. And now they've found out it might take much longer, even 20 days or longer before you show signs. So to add to it all, we have this incredible... it's really panaceas for the public. We're testing them with kits. And the other day, of course, it was announced there that after all this time, the kits are only correct half the time. Well, so is the law of averages if you toss a coin. And then when you dig into the reasons for it being only accurate half, it's because what they're claiming now, because rather than take the responsibility, they're no use, these particular kits, is, well, you see that the staff the modern staff in medicine can't really follow the instructions for it, because it's not just a matter of a simple thing. You got 2 or 3 things to add to it and stir it together, just like a normal laboratory, you see. And they're trying to say that the staff today don't have the brains to work it out. Well, that inspires confidence, doesn't it? So, I'm not telling people to panic. I'm just saying, use your common sense, because you're going to have to use your common sense here. You really are. And as I say, it looks to me that with what's happening today, with today's news and so on, they're really just allowing it to happen. It would seem to be, really. There's one place in Britain where they brought the possible infected people. They didn't know yet, you see, to wait and see. But they brought them in, and they put them up in a hotel, I believe. It was a hotel, kind of quarantine-type hotel. That's self-quarantine. They signed forms, the government says, we made them sign a form promising not to leave there for 14 days. Well, they went back a few days later, they're all gone. And the staff in the hotel said, well, there was no one left to guard them. Does that really look like something that's terrified the guy, when they don't even put guards there in some of them? You really think so? Something stinks somewhere. A lot of things stink, actually. And so I'm not surprised at the rumour mill. The rumour mill must be buzzing like crazy. with such apparent incompetence or negligence. And you can take your pick as to what you want to believe. It doesn't make any sense at all. And then again, other people, as I say, have been passed as cleared and all that, and then had to develop the symptoms later. So we've got so many variables here that really are not. When you don't understand something, and if something might even take a month before it shows in some people, then you'd have to hold all the people for at least a month. You understand that? That would be common sense. And if you keep bringing people in every day from flights all over around the Far Eastern area and quarantining people, you'd have to have for each plane load, you'd have to have a separate quarantine quarters for them, because they can't mix with the ones who came in 2 or 3 days before, because they're in a different timeline for release than you are then, you see. In other words, the recent people, if one person was infected, then all the rest of them who are ready to leave would all get infected too if they were in the same place. So I don't really think they're going to try to go the whole way with this and quarantine anything properly. And they seem pretty resigned with their statements, as I say, today and yesterday, that this is going to go around the world. And right into maybe next year and the year after, in fact. So we'll wait and see what happens. We don't even know what the bulk of the populace who's infected the worst with it happens to be, because years ago I gave talks on the release documentation from Portland Downs in Britain, where they had literally admitted to it, and a few other countries admitted to having the same stuff. Every country's probably involved in it. They have ethnic-specific viruses, which they work on, which makes us feel much safer, doesn't it? The whole point with quiet wars, like that old silent weapons for quiet wars, is to trying to confuse anybody from pointing the finger to, you might suspect who might have let it out, but then you may get led to believe by the perpetrators to where the fingers are pointing, and it could be a setup too. That's the whole point of quiet weaponry, silent weapons for quiet wars. This is the world we live in. And as I say, the world we live in is not a happy place. It's happy through all the masses of fiction we're dosed with and the Disney-esque stuff and so on, and the fantasy. But in reality, the world really it can be a horror show at times like this. And if you haven't seen World Wars, then you won't know what a horror show is. The history of the world, when it comes to dominance run by dominant psychopaths for different nations, is truly a horror show. And there's no doubt about it. Countries definitely have no problem recruiting psychopaths to work in laboratories to create incredible, terrible diseases to kill people. There's no doubt about it. They sign these treaties to pretend that they're not doing, but they just say, well, we're not really making diseases to kill people. We're just altering them now for health reasons, to see if it ever developed itself into this or that strain, we'd have something ready to fight it. So we make this strain, you see. That's what they do. That's what they say. And they get paid all big bucks for this, and they smile on television when they're asked and so on. And they get awards for things being so bright and intelligent. But really, these people are psychopaths. As I've said before, psychopaths don't have normal worry. They don't have normal worry. In fact, they can't handle frustration and anxiety. They have an ability, an incredible ability, to get people fighting around their vicinity with each other. And they'll sit back and watch you. And that's how they work off their frustration and anxiety, is through other people's. They create conflicts for other people to be involved in, and then you just sit back and watch it. I'm not kidding, that's really how it works. A lot of them go into politics. A lot of them work their way up the ladder, or really knife their way up the ladder, you might say, behind folks' backs to get to their top positions. They're very persuasive and very manipulative. Calmly so, though. It's their calmness that makes people believe them. They're so calm. And they eventually get what they want. But they get into these different positions that all governments have, where it's nuclear weaponry. They're the guys that are recruited on purpose to turn the keys. I did talks years ago. It's from the old series on Polaris submarines in Britain. And the Americans were stationed in Britain, as you know, during the whole Cold War. in the nuclear submarine bases, and they did documentaries where they went through the subs and they asked, how do you recruit these guys? Most folk you think would just crumble at the end and it wouldn't turn the key, but it meant literally not just imminent destruction for the enemy that you're going to send them off to, but your own destruction as well. It seemed ridiculous, and most folk might crumble and crumple at that decision, you see. But the psychopaths, they were pretty well geared towards it. They would obey their masters. Psychopaths only obey their paymaster, and they look after themselves. But something superior to them, up above them, with more power, they respect. Anything beneath them, they mock and laugh at, you know. But above them, they had the respect. And they said these guys were selected for their psychopathic tendencies. I think it was the same psychopathic test that they used in high offence prisoners tests. So that's where government recruits, and they put them in the silos and the mainland, and they put them in the subs too. But then the ones who excel in universities in certain areas are selected too. You don't realise that in universities, even school, for the last 40 years, 50 years, even from the junior school or primary school, they call it in Britain, onwards, you're being carefully studied, and there's reports about your behaviour and personality constantly getting put into. Now, long ago, it was through different little paper tests they gave you. Now it's all on computer. They know exactly who you are, and they know even who to pick once you get into high school and groom for their positions in these particular types of positions that I'm talking about now. But as I say, that's the real world. Now, a lot of folk, again, can't even handle that, because really it gives the impression we're on a very delicate balance of destruction or survival when you look at it. But that's how the world is really structured at the moment. It really is. It's never really been a very safe place in any era, but today, with high sciences at work, it isn't either. And to add to the confusion, as I say, you have all these tests that they've been chomping at the bit to have for the sort of lockdown tests for quarantine that we're seeing right now, ready to go into action, and police will get the authorities, military will get the authority, and all that kind of stuff. They've been chomping at the bit because I've never had in the Western world a real activation of these powers to see what they can do. And that's how they find out their weak spots for control, is by having these tests. So, as I've said before, this could be a great opportunity for those at the top to do lots of exercises that they've been chomping at the bit to do for a long, long time. Including, in fact, I'm sure everyone's caught on to it, that keeping people on board those ships, those cruisers, for a good period of time. And they've been studying them, the different groups, especially the different groups that are involved there. They had people from India on the crew, and one of the ships off Japan, I think it was. They had a completely mixed group of passengers, Britain, the US, different countries, and probably Chinese too, and various other nationalities. They've had a good time to study what's happening, who's prone to come down with it, and so on. And what they'll do too is give certain of these antivirus drugs out to different groups, and then study if it works, because it might not work all the same in every different group, you see. So the big experiments are taking place at the same time by those at the top, and the data has come in. And as I say, it's interesting to see that they're now pretty well resigned, I think, to the fact that it's going to go across the planet. And it may be, you understand, there's definitely authorities at the very, very top. Don't think for a minute that in the Western world especially, they're all working independently of each other. There is a form of global governance going on here from the top as to how we'll behave with it or deal with this thing as it goes, as it continues and grows, which is definitely going to do, they say. Meanwhile, as I say, this is happening at the same time as I say, opened up the newspapers, and the top story is what I said it was. Some reality show host dies. And reality shows are all fiction, folks. Don't get involved in it. This is all fiction, and it's all added. You always add the sex into it because it's guaranteed to grab the primitive part of the brain and addict people in this day and age, because that's really what it's meant to do, to lock you into a system, and also to help destroy the system in which you grew up in and make it worse than it was before. And that's part of it too. There's big agendas at work right now, folks. We've all heard about and read about, it's not hearing about, it's actually reading about the sterilization processes that certain big organizations, which I won't mention right now, because they do have the ability to ban you now off social media. Sterilization, put it that way, through different means, or even through all the different phthalates, etc., that are out there, and plastics, and the xenoestrogens, and phytoestrogens, etc., etc. And people are top heavy with this stuff now from so many different sources that it's definitely affecting the sperm count in males, we know that. And women too are being heavily affected by it as well. So there's many things in the make right now to do with bringing down populations across the world. And the ones at the top, and the big groups at the top, are incredibly vocal about the necessity for doing so. So do you really blame the people when this kind of thing breaks out and they're questioning whether this is deliberate or not? Can you really blame them? Come on here. Come on. I can remember years ago giving a talk on a radio station on someone I knew in Canada who worked with educational authorities, who managed to get away many times to go over and work with for the United Nations and other countries, but mainly to do with bringing down the population in places in the Far East. And I casually, she was casually telling me about it. I says, well, listen, I says, who gave you the authority to get involved in bringing down the populations of other people, or anybody for that matter? And she literally looked at me as though, and this is what happens if you're not in the club. It's like they suddenly realize that you're not one of them. And she says, well, somebody has to do it, she says. And well, these are the same people. There's lots of them out there working for the big authorities. And that's how they talk about what they believe they have to do. We won't do it ourselves, So somebody has to do it. This is the real world, Outside the reality shows, this is the real things that actually go on. And most folk are oblivious to it to the day that they no longer walk the planet. But that's the world in which we're living. And we're managed like children all the time. Now, I'm going to touch on some of the topics here. Now, one of the talks I gave, maybe last year, and many times before probably, in different years, is the agenda, where they mention at the top that if you feed people well and give them lots of good proteins and so on, and this is all standard stuff at the top, university level, they teach them that what made people more resistant to bacteria and various diseases that were quite commonplace in the 1800s was basically bad hygiene, poor diet. A lot of folk, the big working class population, didn't have access to good protein, good meat and so on. And of course they didn't have good sewage systems and hygiene, etc., and hot running water, that kind of thing, which all led to disease, just proliferating big time. And people who were caught diseases, many of the diseases, as I say, that are almost eradicated today because of the difference now in hygiene, etc. Back then, the slightest disease could bring you down and kill you. And children especially, high death rate amongst children. So this has all been well understood. So what makes a people healthy and even basically healthy enough to mate, have children, and so, well, they've all listed out what you need. And you need heat for your home, so what you do, you reduce the heat consumption, if you want to bring it down, that is, right? And because if you have good heat in the winter time and cold climates, then your health will be much, much better. Obviously, if you have meat and protein and a varied diet, a good varied diet, and all the things that you need, you'll be physically healthier. And you're able to withstand even simple common colds or even the common flu or whatever. But if you start taking down the heat and start taking away all the good food and so on. This was stuff that was published by authorities, and including under the ecosystem, and all these different systems out there are from the top down. Don't think there's grassroots at all. The ones who even protest, or they think they belong to the grassroots, they're all being used for agendas. Because here's an article here, and I mentioned this would happen eventually. The consumption of red and processed meat has been associated with increased mortality from chronic diseases. So it's this opposite of what actually happens, right? And as a result, it's been classified by the World Health Organization as carcinogenic, such as processed meat, and probably carcinogenic. Now, that's not scientific. There's no probabilities in science, folks. It's either is or it isn't, you see, in science. So probably is used for other reasons. So that it says probably carcinogenic red meat to humans, you see. One policy response is to regulate red and processed meat consumption similar to other carcinogens and foods of public health concerns. Here we describe a market-based approach of taxing red and processed meat according to its health impact. So this is the agenda, folks. This is the agenda. And it's being pushed again. Everything comes from the top, for those who can't figure it out. Forget what you see in the street, students and so on, with their high-paid leaders, of course, who are well in. They're all paid through they even have pension plans for them, for the leaders of these NGOs, who are in on the big plan. The followers are never, As I say, if you want to bring down the population, what do? Well, make them prone to disease by taking away the things they need to survive. Decrease their heat, that's energy, you see. So you got a constantly and mandated frequent increase in the expense of energy to keep yourself warm or to cook or whatever it happens to be. And this is not conspiracy stuff, this is fact. I've read the articles, as I say, it's on my website, of the talks I've given in the past from the organizations at the very top that are pushing all these agendas. Well, good for you if you want to go along with it to save the world. You starve yourself, you make yourself frail and prone to disease, etc. And the big boys at the top and gals will get what they want, which is a vastly reduced population, obviously, because we know why folk today are healthier than they were in the past. We know that. When I was growing up, in fact, a lot of guys, men at the time, who did the hard labouring jobs when you actually had industry and mining, died around just before or right after pensioning age, you see. That was very common. We've even had, to see, the professors, like the one from Australia, stand up and really ask people to start committing suicide. And, you should really do the right thing and allow the jobs to be left for younger people. You're consuming resources on the planet. Well, if you start to go along with these people, these persuasive psychopaths that are put out there as some kind of specialist that you should follow, you better understand that's what they are. They're literally very highly paid psychopaths who are very good at persuading people to do what they want. That's how most psychopaths don't do any real work at all. Even if they're CEOs, they get everyone else to do the work for them, even on the way up the ladder. That's what they do. They're highly manipulative, and people will do it with glee and almost feel an honor to serve them. That's how they are. That's how they affect people. Awfully well, in fact, in that department. And people will do everything for them. Oh, no problem, I'll do that for you. There you go. They're such likable characters. They really are. A lot of the horror movies used to give these kind of characters as forms of Satan, the great evil incarnate. And they're not far wrong in reality. But anyway, as I say, I'll put this article up here about, as they're pushing the same agenda for sustainability, they don't want cattle, remember, and then they don't want pigs. They don't want anything at all that gives you protein. They might give you chickens for a while to wipe them out with some new bird flu, and then down it goes, step by step by step. If you start to wonder if there's something that doesn't smell right here, well, good, you've got a good sense of smell. Don't let anybody call you a conspiracy theorist for just saying, I wonder if when you stop wondering ifs, then you're done for, I'm afraid. You're into Disneyland. So here, another one here too, sustainability, drivers and implications for agribusiness. Well, policymakers have not targeted the agribusiness sector as much as other sectors due to less public pressure. We believe sustainability regulations will become tighter for agribusinesses in the coming years. And it goes on and on and on with the agenda. These are articles that are mainstream articles on sustainability and so on. There's lots of them out there, big foundations, all paid by even bigger foundations to push the global agenda for those who don't quite catch on. And so they want to cut down the greenhouse gases. Now, most greenhouse gases out there is actually what comprised of water vapor, for those who don't know it. CO2 is a trace gas, which is invisible, completely invisible. Carbon dioxide, you breathe out your carbon-based life forms. If you want to cut it back, you understand you're cutting back yourselves, ultimately. I hope you understand that. Anything that lives on this planet is carbon-based. So we're living in an amazing science fiction movie combined with madness, because if you believe it all and can put it all together and still believe it, and go along with what they're pushing, you'd have to be mad. You understand that? I hope you understand that. You'd have to be mad. H.G. Wells, I've mentioned him so many times. He's a big promoter for the global elite of his day. In the late 1800s, H.G. Wells first was picked actually to be a good propagandist for the agenda, and eventually for the Fabian Society, which he helped co-found. He was a big proponent of free love, they called it, in the late 1800s. No responsibilities, free love, yeah. The same agendas as Karl Marx. Isn't that astonishing, eh? But he worked for the global elite. I think so did Marx, personally, but that's the agenda, you see. And then he became a propagandist, and he says, well, you know, we give help to the poor and unfortunates. And London was full of poor unfortunates, and across England too at that time, and Scotland, in the working class areas. Because in the early days, there was no welfare system if you got sick or ill or anything. In fact, the wives had to go down the mines with the children to take the place of the miners. I'm talking up into the start of the 20th century for those who don't know this. Well, the man was sick, they'd have to go down and do it. And because if they didn't, and no one stood in his place, he lost his job if he was lucky enough to recover. That's reality. And H.G. Wells really says, well, what happens with these poor and fortunate? He says, well, we feed them and we give them healthy food and warmth and so on, and clothe them properly and give them good hygienic conditions. And what do they do? He says, they breed. You understand, he saw them as a separate species. Well, that's how the elite see you today, folks. They're in the know, in the understanding of the poor unfortunates of the general population who will never figure this out. And the poor unfortunates of today would actually be called middle class by last century's, even the previous century's levels of understanding. But you see, if you're not in the know with the ones at the top, you see, then you're nobody. Power is an incredibly addictive thing to these psychopaths. They crave it. And if they can't get a start of it, they'll make the start by creating an organization and climbing up it until they're dominating you. And that's what's happened, of course. But you're supposed to just be the general public, watch your TV, dress the way they tell you to dress, wear drainpipe pants, you see. Have hair that's just a little tuft on top of your head if you're a guy, like a round circle. And watch television and watch all your reality stuff and be content. There you go. Don't think too much, because then you might be a problem. You might start demanding things like answers, and that's taboo. So anyway, drivers and implication for agribusiness. I'll put that up too. It's just astonishing how it's all out there for you if you want to look at it. I want to mention too that the New South Wales and Australia, there's a big battle going on between right now of the ones who want to squash different facts have emerged, because there's big agendas behind all of this too. You've got government stepping in and taking the land back for big corporations, And big corporations are getting it for peanuts or even free, in fact, from the burned out areas where the homeless was stood in some places. And there's big mining projects for corporations scheduled there for the elements, the need for the new battery systems for the cars and so on. It's just astonishing it all comes together, isn't it? It's quite something to live through all this and see it. So anyway, here's one that says here, eco-terrorists may have lit the fires. This is a senator, right? And if not, why not? Given the loss of life, the extensive loss of property and the economic impact, was eco-terrorism an agenda item at any of the recent meetings of the National Security Committee of Cabinet? She told Parliament. This is a senator. And so the New South Wales Rural Fire Service Chief Shane Fitzsimmons last month said the bushfire season had been dominated by natural causes, mainly lightning, right? Queensland's police say they only about 10% of the fires were deliberately or recklessly lit through human involvement between September and January the 8th. However, Senator Fierravanti Wells pointed to the National Centre for Research in Bushfires and Arson satellite analysis of 113,000 fires from 1997 to 2009, saying 40% were deliberately lit. And they've got the facts for this, you see. She said there was no recorded lightning strikes on most of the days bushfires started across New South Wales and Queensland in September, suggesting a level of coordination. Those alleged arsonists already arrested need to be thoroughly investigated by law enforcement. Who are they? What was their motive and intent, she said. Are they lone actors or part of a sinister collective conducting eco-terrorism? Was there a level of coordination? Were any organizations with a history of law-breaking involved in order to further their respective narratives? The former International Development Minister said the media build-up of an impending hot, dry summer set the scene for people with criminal intent to act. Well, they also have got, she's talking about the big eco organizations out there too. You've got them everywhere about saving the world. It wouldn't be personally destroy parts of it to try to make it all real, you see. This is what's happening as well. It's a good article, and I'll put the whole thing up for you if you want to read it. And you must always look at all sides of everything and realize that there are sides to things, that it's not just lightning or whatever. They have the statistics about lightning strikes as versus the fact that there weren't lightning strikes in these places. But they're definitely deliberately started, so many of them. And it's not hard to get people at the top too to go along with it, and all the police or whatever it happens to be, because they belong to certain organizations. And believe you me, again, big money changes. We're living in an awfully corrupt system, folks. It's incredibly corrupt, really. And the ones at the top live so high in the hog, it's just astonishing. You know, I mean, I'm living in the past. The older you get, you find you live in the past where maybe $100 actually meant $100, even though by today's value, maybe the $100 from the 1980s, you would need maybe $300, maybe more, to buy the same amount of things you get back there. But you still live in the past. So when you see people like Justin Trudeau spending like $50 for his special donuts, you know, things like that, you can't, the average person can't imagine it for 12 donuts, for these special donuts, you know, or spending close to, almost $400,000 on just the food and drinks for 5 flights that he's on, not for the flights themselves, just the food and drink, things like that. We can't imagine that, folks, if you're living in the past, and I am, generally, because I don't spend much at all, don't make much to spend. But when you see what they do at the top, hundreds and hundreds of dollars means nothing to them. They probably spend about $1,000 a time, the way that I would think about 100 in a sense, you know. At the top, I'm talking about the spoiled generation that he comes from. But that's the way it is. That's another story. And then you get this one too. It's very much like, as I said years and years ago, it's like they would copy the book of Revelation, because all the plans in there, isn't it, for terrifying wars, with threats of war and rumors of war. There's always that going on, for sure. Earthquakes, we've had that even under the sea and so on. And never mind the social disruption, where children don't obey parents, if they even have parents. And ones who are parents, you go woman against man, man against woman, and so on. Everybody's fighting everybody else, you see. And you get plagues and pestilences. Now you have swarms of up to 80 million locusts, it says, decimating crops in East Africa. a 40-mile wide circle off them. That's how they appear from the top. It's a big circle as they eat before they swarm. But it's threatening food security for 13 million people. Well, why don't they deal with that? They can go over those things and spray them way out where they are because if they don't, this 40-mile wide one could end up being 80-mile wide very quickly. So why would you let it happen in this day and age? This is the 21st century we're in here. Another article, Judicial Watch uncovers that NIH fetal organ purchases, right? National Institute for Health, for humanized mice testing, it says, where they're mixing things together for mice and with human genes and so. Why? So the National Institute for Health paid nearly, and this is nothing, this is a drop in the bucket to what they put out in other things which you don't want to know about, nearly $20,000 to a California-based firm to purchase organs from aborted human fetuses for a program to create humanized mice for HIV research. According to just maybe they'll ask them how they feel if they infect them. Right? How do you feel, mouse? The reasons we're given for things are never the truth when it comes to this kind of stuff. Really? Huh? Really? Come on. And then in China, they're doing similar things with pigs, with human genes and so on. You really have to get. This is a science fiction only. It's the truth. It's a reality. This is you're living the reality show, the real reality show. And I said many years ago when 9/11 happened, because that was the first chapter. You'd open the next chapter of the book. I knew that. So a whole bunch of agendas had to be fulfilled, not just the wars across the Middle East, across the world, but also the social wars, which has really has been a roller coaster. It's a change all what used to be norms into various other things too at the same time, big time, and mandated it in such a way that is no one would have believed you 50 years ago or even 40 years ago. Wouldn't have believed it. And here we are. We're living through it all today. Just astonishing, eh? And also this article here, Smart City, again, with the fires now, the big push for the whole agenda for the 21st century, Agenda 21, with this 2030 and all the rest of it as they go along. They must get us all living inside these big cities within the next few years, really. Well, how do you do it? Well, you burn them off, obviously. It's a good way to do it. Get them into the cities, say it's safe in the cities. And then again, you see, with this coronavirus, they'll come out eventually and say, we just can't go out to all these rural areas and check people. It's just not safe. And therefore, if they all lived in the cities, it would be much, much better, wouldn't it? And et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Monotonously, yeah. But yeah, it's the smart city involvement in Australia is entering a more actionable phase with increasing number of local government and private bodies now actively engaged in pilot projects. Well, were you asked about any of this? Were you given any votes on it? No. Anything that matters, you're never asked about, folks. Never. Look at the massive entertainment to keep you from being involved and knowing what's going on. So that might prompt you to be involved. Well, that's part of the reasons you get so much entertainment. And then 5G, an opportunity to turbocharge Australia's smart cities. Really? I've never met a city yet that's very smart. Not really. Not for me personally, you know. A lot of folk like living in cities, not me. I don't like it at all. It's too neurotic, too fake. It's not a natural way for folk to live, actually. The whole system in a city is unnatural. They said that back in Plato's days. The easiest systems to collapse were the artificial systems. Well, in cities, they don't make anything. They don't grow anything. They import everything in their life. It's all based on money and investments and so on, and round circles as money goes round. And most of the money for those in the cities goes in trying to pay a rent, or if they're even higher up the scale, a mortgage on something. It becomes a trap for people. Nothing smart about that. But for those who want to control, they'll love you to be living where they can have you all controlled very easily. Look what's happening in Wuhan and many other cities in China today, where they're literally quarantining entire cities now. There's power over them, eh? A good article on euthanasia. Again, I'm getting back to Agenda 21 and again, the year 2001 with 9/11. with it, the unfolding of the agenda. I said, you'd have to hang on to your sanity, but the hardest thing you hold on to is your sanity. I knew that we go through this incredible roller coaster of change that was all mandated and published years and years beforehand, going way back to maybe the 1920s, where they're going to take the whole world. And they used a war to make it happen. No, you've got no privacy. People have now accepted the fact that they have no privacy. People fought for centuries to get privacy and rights away from the government and the crown. And they gave it all away so quickly and easily for peace and safety. That was the agenda at the time. And the second part of the agenda, with all the things that have happened already, is, of course, for survivability and sustainability. That's the next part, too. Well, people don't have to live that long, and they're costing money, So euthanasia was introduced. In Canada, they offer it in the hospitals. I won't even go into all the talks I've given before about it, where they even have people who are not dying, and young too, who had illnesses, but they were not dying, and they were certainly sentient enough and cognizant enough as to what was going on. But that's all they were offered. This tragedy was happening. It all started in Holland, of course, the big test bed of it. And there's an article here, Justice Denied to Protect Euthanasia Law. It tells you how some doctors were actually charged initially, but the judge overturned the charges, even though there was negligence in it, what they actually did. In order to protect the euthanasia laws, they wouldn't let it go through. They let the doctors go. The euthanasia agenda was more important than had laws been broken. That's the world you live in. Big agendas from the top. And again, Australia, after all the fires, suddenly gets all this massive rain, in certain areas. New South Wales, for instance. This is Australia's getting some desperately needed rain. A downpour knocked back a third of New South Wales fires in one day. Boom. Heavy, heavy rains. But if you went into weather control, you'd be laughed at, even though you've been living under it for many, many years. When all this is happening with the coronavirus, Bill Gates, the guy who came out in, I think last year in October, with a tabletop plan of a supposedly imaginary outbreak of coronavirus and says 60 million might die. Here he is now. Bill Gates warns of 10 million deaths as a virus spreads to Africa. He just doesn't stop, this guy, does he? And you think he's something to do with computers. These are front people with big agendas who are made into superstars as though somehow they have more. They call themselves the transhumanists, by the way. That's what they are. In that, they're the big front people with millions and billions of dollars behind them by big organizations that they're not necessarily the ones that you think they're, to promote them as some sort of leaders, beneficent dictators in a sense, or beneficent rulers. Really, that's what it is, rulers. The old Fisher King idea, you see. And so you think they're somehow geniuses and should allow them to rule your lives. Well, you don't vote for them. Yeah, they have democracy. You don't, folks. How come everybody who suddenly hits the X amount of $1 billion supposedly in their bank account or their organization suddenly is on board with the same world agenda: sustainability, depopulation, eradication of farmlands and livestock, etc. How come they all suddenly just happen to bingo? I guess it must be a natural law of nature, right? Bingo, and you suddenly become one of them. Then in all the TV stations across the world, all the media will give you great write-ups, and now you're there to guide the world into a better way of being. I have seen the light, and no one questions it. That's how slickly it's all done, And then you get border agent sees a bag, that was last week, I think, of dead birds from a passenger traveling from China. These were dried birds they had. Dried birds, little birds, supposedly for cat food. Well, there's no shortage of cat food in the Western world, folks, So a bag of dead birds was discovered by U.S. Customs and Border Patrol in the luggage of a passenger traveling from China to a Washington, D.C. area airport authorities. You can see why conspiracies would jump into and say, this is part of it. Because at the same time as this is happening, and you've got the coronavirus outbreak, this particular one, this COVID one, 19, you've also got two new flu virus, another 2 separate flu strains broken out in China at the same time. And they're related to the bird flu. So you have a guy bringing in birds, dead birds, supposedly if you can see why conspiracy would jump into that one quite easily. It's not, I wouldn't blame anybody for jumping on that one. It makes you wonder why authorities aren't jumping on that possible side of it, or maybe they are. Because there's a lot of angst amongst nations right now as to who caused the problems in the first place. Maybe they're all to blame, and that's probably true. Another article, 78 Britons face being left behind in coronavirus quarantine ship, cruise ship, as the US prefers to airlift all its 428 citizens back to America. Well, either they're all clear, but how could you even be sure they're all clear if they've all been living together? They have to put amazing. You understand the levels of quarantine. You've got daily flights to and from the Far East, all different countries. You couldn't cope with that, so I don't think they intend to cope with it. I really don't. I really don't. And another one, a bushfire aftermath, Australian land grab. I thought I'd just toss it in too. Because they're grabbing the land now, an international agenda for sustainability and control. There you go. Yeah, China reports bird flu outbreak near the epicenter of the coronavirus. Wow, my goodness, eh? I wonder if someone's taking the top off the lap here or something. It's a bit of a little humour there, folks, before I get banned for having any humour at all. Here's an article too from a British newspaper. Coronavirus fears 400,000 British people, could die from the bug, as pregnant general practitioner says, I'm scared, right? This is the headline, right? In a big paper in Britain. If you said that, like I've just said it, I could be a nutcase in a conspiracy theory, but they can say it and it's okay. And it says, the National Health Service workers laid bare their fears about coronavirus as they warn the country is not prepared to handle a major outbreak, according to a shock new survey. One pregnant general practitioner has admitted she is scared as scientists warn that 400,000 people could die in the UK alone. The study was carried out by Channel 4 News. I think it's the BBC, but it's Channel 4 anyway. It may be BBC or not, I don't know. It shows us a staggering 96% of National Health Service workers don't think the health service is ready. Of course they're not ready. If you're going to keep bringing people in without the ability to quarantine them, with supposedly faulty test kits, to say the least, and this ridiculous thing of pointing a little thermal detector near your head, you've got better chances of reading tea leaves in a cup if a person's got it or not. I'm not kidding you. Or toss a coin. Many of them, people don't show any symptoms till it suddenly hits them. Suddenly, poof. And as I said, the period is so varied too. So I'll put this article up as well. And then we've got corona incubation period could be as long as 24 days. The World Health Organization has not changed its 14-day quarantine recommendations while it aims to fast-track the drug treatments, it says. And this is a big paper too. It's not a little conspiracy. It's Fox News. Fox News Service. Could be as long as 24 days. Well, no one's hammering them. And of course, they're now calling it COVID-19. No one's really using it because they already call it coronavirus. And the amounts that have got it is way, way, way low. The specialists in Britain and elsewhere are saying that now. It's way, way low, way below, including the deaths, unfortunately, too. The original articles also said could infect 2/3 of global population. And this is from the big papers that are allowed to terrify you see. It's quite something, isn't it? 8 planes put on lockdown at Heathrow over coronavirus fears, it says. And this one here, they actually had people with temperatures, some of them. 8 planes at Heathrow Airport grounded this morning after passengers complained of coronavirus symptoms. Passengers on a United Airlines flight from San Francisco were told to stay put after landing because someone on board may have caught the deadly flu-like disease, etc., etc. There's so many of them. For those who want to know, most folk will ignore this because it is scary stuff. And you can go back to your Dancing with the Stars, or whatever it is, or whatever it is they're doing with these dating things for reality shows. I think it's a bit further than just dancing. But anyway, that's what we get fed during this kind of thing. And most folk can't handle this, of course. I mean, really, who can handle this? If this agenda is meant to bring more folk in, and accept this is going to spread, they've already written off a whole stack of the population over 55. And that will have been heavily discussed with the big panels at the top. They're discussing these things all the time. Who's valuable, who isn't, etc., etc., you know. Plus the London Underground, and think about it too, could be a hotbed for coronavirus. Any underground in any city with the tube systems, eh? You know how far they've done all the testing. Remember they used to test that was for the bacterial warfare of terrorist tests that they did. They dropped different substances and they find out how far it travels. Well, in a subway, you know that whoosh of air, eh? That can travel hundreds of miles very quickly underground. Poof. Doesn't that make you feel better, eh? And the police in Britain now have got hazmat suits dispensed to them, and the military obviously too. And they're able to handcuff suspected patients. They force them into quarantine and back into quarantine if they try to get out. Also from the US Military Times, they've got it here. The US military is prepping for coronavirus pandemic. And so the US Northern Command, that's the big one for Canada and the States, executing plans to prepare for a potential pandemic of the novel coronavirus, now called COVID-19, according to Navy and Marine Corps service-wide messages issued this week. The executive order issued by the Joint Staff and approved by Defence Secretary Mark Esper this month directed Northern Command and Geographic Combatant Commanders to initiate pandemic plans, which include ordering commanders to prepare for widespread outbreaks and confining service members with a history of travel to China as well. So that's a command that's responsible for North America. Does that make you feel better? So, as I say, I don't want to scare everybody. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see what goes on. I did read, though, one article that a young guy from China, a teenager, said that this wasn't some little sniffle in the nose. He said he's never felt so sick in his life. Every joint in his body was agony, he said. And he had the typical symptoms of a non-expectorant cough and a very sore chest because your muscles get all strained and so with coughing, etc. So if you're getting these symptoms, be careful, folks. Take care of yourselves. But don't panic at the moment because, as I say, it's here. It is here. And if you have at least enough foodstuffs supplied, just basic stuff to get you over a month even, from stores, general stores and so on, in case you do get sick and can't get out for a little while, it'll help tide you over as you get through this. And you've got to keep positive and see how you'll get through it. They have had people recovering from it. As I say, it's unfortunate. The older folk, definitely, especially men, it says is targeting more. But so you take better care of the people that you can take care of and those that you know. That's what you have to do in these situations of crisis. And again, you got to stop saying, well, who caused it? Well, as I say, every country's caused it in a sense, because we all have these organizations that are busy working to create awful, terrible things to be used for awful, nefarious reasons, which are pretty disgusting. And they're diabolical. Let's put it that way. They're diabolical. Of course they are. But as I say, keep positive and don't let anybody say, cough up yourself. Use a mask if you have to. Who cares what they say at the top? You look after yourself. No one else is going to look after you in these situations. You got to look after yourself as best as you can. And for those around you too, if just a few friends will all help each other out. That's what you really, really need, folks. Really. So really take care. And from myself, Alan Waterman, here at Canada, sorry for the talk. It's not very pleasant. It's good night to me, your God, or your gods go with you. And by the way, the other night there too, with this global warming we're getting, I was down to minus 35 Fahrenheit. So there you are. Good night.